angry vigilante gamer? I don't know. He's just some guy with this like really terrible VTuber model who's just been like making endless amounts of content trying to attack other Nintendo fans in the community. And it is high time that I call this individual out because as of this moment, like please keep in mind this could change at any time. At this moment, he is the lowest of the low, the most delusional, insane, coping and seething, malding Nintendo hater channel there is. It is downright insane what this individual tells people in his videos.
Harmon, I swear, your hatred for non-Nintendo knows no bounds. I'm surprised Nintendo even allows you to have access to the internet. Well, let's get into this reaction.
Nintendo doesn't have the ability to decide whether or not I have access to the internet. Like, what is this? Like, what am I looking at? Like, what am I listening to? Like, oh, Nintendo, I'm surprised they allow you to do this. Like, huh? Like, they don't. Like, they don't have any control over me at all. I don't drink alcohol. I drink Arizona green tea, and I am gonna crack open a bottle of this.
I mean, maybe you need to crack open a beer every once in a while. Maybe you'll be a little bit more pleasant to deal with.
In celebration of the death of Rareware, the death of Microsoft.
Number one, Harmon, it's not the death of either of them. Number two, you should not be celebrating over 9,000 people losing their damn jobs. This is not a time for celebration. Will you stop trying to continue this console war BS?
The death of Xbox. How unbelievable.
Harmon, they literally own Call of Duty. You know how much money that they make on Call of Duty alone? Xbox is not going anywhere.
Wait. Let me get this straight. This guy, Microsoft has just laid off like 9,000 employees at Xbox, right? You know, John Romero's studio has been shut down. You know, Hi-Fi Rush is done. You know, all these people have just lost their jobs. They will not be producing any new video games. You know, huge L for Microsoft, right? Everyone's acknowledging it. Everyone's talking about it. This doesn't make any sense. This is like, you know, a massive disaster of epic proportions that is a clear indication of Xbox declining as a brand. And yet this man will come out and try and tell you that Xbox is perfectly fine because they have Call of Duty. Like, really? Like, oh, but the sales numbers for COD are so high. Like, COD isn't even an exclusive. You know, like, this is the reality of the situation, is that Xbox is leaving the console space. They are bleeding money. They have always been bleeding money. And they cannot retain what they've been trying to accomplish over the past 25 years. Game Pass has been a complete failure. Their attempts at creating new IP have been complete failures. Their attempts at like branching out into other genres have been complete failures. And most particularly, their numerous acquisitions that they have performed under Phil Spencer have ended in complete failure, where a lot of these companies are in a worse position than they were 10 years ago. Is it that we've spent the past 25 years being told that Rareware is past their prime and they're not good anymore and they can't put out good games, and yet
I think that's only you saying that. The thing is, they got a lot of great IPs under their umbrella, but Microsoft wouldn't let them sit there and do anything with them.
No. This is a complete cope. You know, we've gotten numerous new entries in iconic Rareware franchises over the past 20 years. We got Perfect Dark Zero, we got Battletoads, we got Killer Instinct, and they were producing like another Perfect Dark game when like that just got canceled, right? We have seen numerous returns to these classic formulas, right? You know, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts got produced, right? You know, Microsoft was not dictating what Rareware was doing. That was entirely on them. A fact that is extremely evident if you see just how these people were behaving in regards to how Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts was received, right? People have been demanding for decades to get a Banjo 3E. We need a new game like that. And every single time it comes up, Rareware themselves were just like, nah. Like, even under the Nintendo ownership, they were doing this. The problem is that they just don't want to do it. The problem is that they somehow, for some reason, they believe that they're too good to produce a new Banjo-Kazooie game, like a new traditional 3D platformer, and instead want to like do some. They really think that 3D platformers are some niche thing that wouldn't resonate with today's market, which is obviously not true. But this idea that Microsoft was controlling them and preventing them from making good games is a complete and total cope and really needs to be treated as such. Like, Rareware has a long history of not doing what the fans want. People still don't want to acknowledge why. They don't want to admit that Nintendo was directly involved in all of Rareware's hits in the 90s.
No, I honestly think it was the other way around. I think Rareware was involved with Nintendo's success in the 90s, not really Nintendo having success for them. I think that's how it goes.
Does this guy know anything about the company? Does he know anything about Rareware or Nintendo or the relationship? Like, Nintendo owned a minority stake in Rare at the time. They own like 49% of them. Like, this idea that Rareware was this independent agent that carried the N64. Not true. Like, Nintendo was directly involved with all of Rareware's projects when they owned them. They were involved with like Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie to a certain extent, like, GoldenEye. Miyamoto was like, providing feedback for games. He was taking trips down there. They were responsible for for Dinosaur Planet becoming Star Fox Adventures, right? Like, that is the reality of the situation. That Nintendo owned Rareware and was directly involved in every decision they made. This is the reality of the situation. Trying to cut Nintendo out of Rareware's successes in the 90s is complete and utter delusion. Clearly meant, I believe, to imply that like Rareware was better than Nintendo and that Nintendo was just holding them back, which is not only a complete and total cope, it completely flies in the face of what we're seeing now. The company's slow and gradual decline that began immediately after the Microsoft acquisition. Without Nintendo, Rareware completely went to trash immediately. Like, there was no real holdouts or no real no real decline period. It began immediately, and anybody who has been a longtime fan of the company understands. They do not want to admit that the N64 was an amazing platform. They don't want to admit that Rareware made a mistake.
Yes, the N64 was an amazing platform, had a lot of great games, but guess what? The PS1 was better. The sales numbers speak for themselves. Sony still has the greatest JRPG of all time, which is Legend of Dragoon. Sony, you better remake this game already.
Selling themselves to Microsoft. This is something that people who are casual observers of the situation don't understand, is that Rareware sold their half of the company.
Yes, and if I remember correctly, they sold 51%, so it was more than half, and then at a later date, Nintendo sold the rest of it.
Well, more like 51%, not quite a half. 51% of their company to Microsoft, and Nintendo sold their shares afterward. You don't.
Yes, we understand, Harmon, how it works. I just explained it to him. Can you get on with it already? I ain't got all damn night.
This man is reacting to a pre-recorded video of me talking about the Microsoft acquisition of Rareware. And he is telling me that he has already explained something that I explained in my video. The one that he is reacting to. He is complaining about a pre-recorded video of me explaining something that he mentioned offhand like in the video. He's trying to make it seem as if he explained this first. Like, how insane do you have to be to do that? Like, how out of touch with reality, how delusional, how autistic do you have to be to not understand the fact that this is a pre-recorded video and I cannot react to things you bring up in your reaction video? See, people got acknowledge, the reality of the situation is that everything bad that's happened to Rareware over the past 25 years, all the terrible 4Kids television series, the failure of all their new IPs,
A lot of that was probably Microsoft on that one. Yes, they didn't make some amazing games when they went to Microsoft. If Microsoft would have let them make another Banjo-Kazooie game, I think it would have done well when they first acquired.
They did make another Banjo-Kazooie game, and it was garbage.
Them. Nowadays, not so much. I would love another Banjo-Kazooie, but from what I've been told, it's not like that character really sold well for Super Smash Brothers.
Banjo-Kazooie did not sell well for Super Smash Bros. A game where the majority of players will just get the season passes that include all of the characters in a bundle. Like, wow, Banjo-Kazooie, like, they didn't sell well on Super Smash Bros. Like, what are you talking about? That is the most relevant thing Banjo-Kazooie have been involved with in the past 25 years, right? Like, Smash was a huge thing for Banjo-Kazooie and could have easily been like a major driving force in like bringing back a reboot and getting like the old team back together and putting out like a third game. Like, this was a huge deal, and you are gonna tell me with a straight face that Banjo-Kazooie did not do well on Super Smash Bros. A game that isn't even a Microsoft product. All they did with that game was allow Nintendo to put Banjo-Kazooie in a game that was already finished, right? Other than the licensing agreement, like, this wouldn't have been too difficult or expensive. Their inability to create like new titles on Xbox, all the canceled projects, the failed revivals, like Killer Instinct, which a lot of people still refuse to admit is a failure, by the way.
Harmon, it wasn't a failure. You think anything that doesn't go on Nintendo becomes a failure.
And, where we're at now, Connect Sports and the cancellation of Everwild and Joe Dark, featuring a masculine.
That wasn't their fault. That was Microsoft's fault. From what we've heard from the rumors that Everwild's game was actually being close to being ready and they chose to cancel the damn thing.
Rareware has just been like in free fall for like a very, 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 very long time. And yet, like, people really didn't want to admit it because for the longest time, back in the 2000s, the narrative was that Nintendo failed.
Because they did. Whether you like it or not, Nintendo did fail during the N64 and the GameCube. Yes, they are considered successes, but if you want to compare them to the other ones, they didn't really sell a whole lot.
They're still considered successes, but compared to the others, they didn't sell a whole lot. Like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? Like, the reality of the situation, like with any business, your sales are going to go up and they're going to go down. The reality is not everything is going to be like some huge record-shattering hit, right? Like, but with the GameCube and the N64, just because the sales were lower than other video game platforms doesn't diminish their success or their long-standing appeal or their longevity. Like, if anything, I think with the way the N64 has been remembered, it kind of emphasizes something that like we really do need to discuss more. Like, there's a lot of importance in creating like a product that resonates with a lot of people and that people look back on fondly, right? N64 and GameCube are really good examples of how, even though it had lower sales numbers, it had very, very passionate fans. So much so that today people still look back on the console fondly and will pick up, accessories and to play games released on that platform. I look back on the N64 and GameCube era very fondly. It's a really good example, I think, of how Nintendo has been like with consoles like the N64 and the GameCube, how they still were building their brand and how they became an industry icon. People can scream about the sales numbers all they want, but that they cannot diminish the fact that the games on these platforms have left an insane impact on the general gaming community.
Even though the N64 I did love, the GameCube I did love, the Wii, nah, wasn't my thing. Sorry. You guys can enjoy it all you want to. I'm not denying it wasn't a good system. It just wasn't for me.
Because they allowed Rareware to go. That was like the big prevailing narrative, in the 2000s, and it's become apparent over time.
Well, Harmon, maybe if they would have kept Rareware, maybe they would have sat there and actually been able to produce some games that they're known for, the good ones. Maybe they would have made a better Killer Instinct. Maybe they would have made the next one. Maybe they would have made a sequel to Banjo and Kazooie. Maybe they could have kept on working with the Donkey Kong games.
That Nintendo absolutely did the right thing in kicking Rareware to the curb, because they were causing problems. They were causing delays. They were making ludicrously expensive products.
I don't know into the whole reason why that they chose to sell it to Microsoft, but my guess is maybe they didn't like that their competitor owned more of the company than what they did and thought it was just better to give that up to them. Maybe that's what my guess is. I could be wrong.
Forcing them to package in the expansion pack in with every copy of Donkey Kong 64 is a really, really good example.
Yeah, I don't think that was their fault. You do understand that game like that, because they weren't the only ones. I'm pretty certain there was one of the Zelda games that you had to use it for also. But in order to play that Donkey Kong 64, it was too big for the standard one. You had to use something like that to play it.
The prevailing narrative that Rareware carried the N64 is completely and utterly false.
Nah, more like they carried the Super Nintendo. Well, not really carried them, but just remember, Harmon, we know you love Donkey Kong. The only reason why that Donkey Kong is as big as it is because of Rare. You need to accept that. Because of Rare,
let's completely forget about the original arcade game, created by Shigeru Miyamoto himself, which is one of the most iconic arcade games of all time, which feature this incredibly competitive high score community to this day, that established all these iconic aspects of the brand. That was the progenitor of Super Mario Bros. Right? Yeah, Rareware is the only reason Donkey Kong is popular. Yeah, sure. I'm sure if they were never contracted to make Donkey Kong Country, the character would never have been mainstream, would never have reappeared again, would never have been in any other games. No, that is a complete and utter delusional code. Of course, they put out a lot of classic games, a lot of games that are still played and enjoyed to this day. But the N64 was a fantastic console that far surpassed the PS1 in general.
Oh yeah, you are so correct, Harmon. Really surpassed it. Oh yeah, N64 got 33 million units sold. The PS1 had 103 million units. Oh yeah, totally surpassed it. You are completely correct. Your logic makes sense, even though the
N64 games have stayed far more relevant than their PS1 equivalents. It is insane seeing people today still playing Mario 64 or Ocarina of Time or Banjo-Kazooie or what have you, all while games like Metal Gear Solid are pretty much completely forgotten. The most popular PS1 exclusives cannot hold a candle to the most popular N64 ones.
Facts say otherwise.
Right? And that continued into the GameCube era, even without them. This idea that Nintendo was failing, after the Rareware era when
Oh yeah, you are so correct, Harmon. Yep, the GameCube did so great, a measly 21 million units, when the N64 did 32 million units, while they had Rare under their umbrella. You are so correct. Oh, and what did the competitor, the PS2, sell? Oh, that's right, 160 million units, the biggest selling console.
Ah, yes, the mystical 160 million PS2 sales numbers. I sure remember in 2006 just gawking at that huge number, At the time, it was like 100 million. So like, so like, the 160 million units for the PS2 is just complete fake. I would argue that the PS1 sales are also fake. It's really not worth like discussing PlayStation sales numbers. It really isn't because like all the numbers they've put out over the years are just obviously inflated and fake and don't represent the real market at all. Like I'll give you an example here. The secondhand market, right? One of the things they don't tell you when it comes to like the disc versus cartridges debate is just how much better N64 cartridges have aged compared to PS1 discs. Because like even like 20 years ago, like PS1 discs were having all these problems. Like they would scratch, they would glitch out, they were cheap, they would break. I had like my copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories stomped on, by a child, just jumping on a desk. But like, my all my N64 cards work like flawlessly, right? So what that means is the secondhand market is way stronger on N64. So, I've seen this happen where like, people have N64s like lying around, they're not using them. Hey, bro, you want my N64? So they just give people N64s for free. They give people games for free. And as a result of that, a lot of like iconic games like Mario 64, Tony Hawk, like DK 64, what have you, like a lot of these games trade hands and get played by like significantly more people than like any of the PS1 games. And I do think that's like a major thing about Nintendo consoles that like people don't really account for is just how much more social and just how much more like community driven it is, right? Like it is shocking, how even like a couple of years ago, I still knew people who played like Bomberman 64. Okay, who still play like older games like Super Smash Bros. Melee competitively, like seeing like I myself, getting into Pikmin speedrunning, right? Like a little bit, like not a hardcore player, but just learning how to play the game. So, like, again, like people keep coming back and playing these old games on Nintendo hardware all the time, and I do think that's like the major takeaway when looking at like the current state of gaming, the current state of like what's happening here. When it looks at like this kind of the endless sales talk, like it doesn't represent the reality at all. I'll give you a more recent example. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild versus Horizon Zero Dawn, right? The narrative at the time was that like Horizon Zero Dawn was a serious competitor to Zelda, that it was like just as big, that it was a completely new IP, that it was better, that it was more realistic, and yet like nobody who played both would ever say that Horizon was as good as Zelda. Like the AI was weird, the mechanics were weird, the story was woke. There's so much wrong with Horizon Zero Dawn. And yet the narrative was that it sold like 20 million units and it was this major tentpole IP. Sony really gaslit people into thinking it was some major title. And by the time the sequel came out, like the entire series like fell flat on its face. The big IP that they were pushing in 2018, their big new thing, their new mascot character, Aloy, just became a complete joke, like Shuya Yoshida himself, came out and said that he was shocked by how poorly, like, Forgotten West did, right? He really thought that Sony, like for Horizon Zero Dawn, was like this hugely popular thing, but it wasn't. It was smoke and mirrors. None of it was real at all. Nobody was that enthusiastic about the product. Meanwhile, you have like the Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, the Zelda sequel that does sell a whole lot of units, that is hugely popular and influential, and is now considered to be far superior to Breath of the Wild. So again, like the contrast between like hugely hated Nintendo games that everyone tries to damage control, like Tears of the Kingdom, versus like some random Sony exclusive that the industry wants to push for whatever reason. Like the difference is like very noticeable. It's very clear just how this business works and just how aggressively game journals and YouTubers try and downplay the average Nintendo game.
Of all time.
completely laughable. Okay, I've talked about this before, but like I'm seeing like people like Andre Seegers like try and come out and say like, well, actually, Nintendo has lost every console generation other than the Switch, and I'm just like,
I wouldn't say every console generation. They did sit here and lose in the N64, the GameCube, and the Wii U. Oh boy, did they get their asses whooped for the Wii U. But all the other ones, I believe that they won. If I'm correct, I believe the NES beat the rest of them, and the Super Nintendo beat out the Genesis, if I'm correct.
they've been profitable every year since like 1981, other than like 2013 or 2014. I don't remember what it is, and that was just because of a new console launch.
Harmon, that is completely irrelevant if they sat there and been profitable. The only reason why they were profitable during that time was because of the handheld. You do understand that, right? Well, they might have been a little bit profitable with the N64, but let's not kid ourselves. The majority of the money that they were making wasn't from the N64 and the GameCube. If we were being honest, it was because of the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance. At least I'm pretty certain. I could be wrong, but I'm almost dead set on that one.
Like, generally speaking, Nintendo is an extremely successful company. And yet there's this prevailing narrative that, like, well, actually, PlayStation sells more. Like, the PS2 is the best-selling console ever. Like, hey, genius. You know how much money they lost on the PS3? The PS3 by itself wiped out all the profits of the PS1 and the PS2. That is...
You do realize that the PS3 still sold pretty damn well, right? You do understand that. Yeah, they might have not...
Selling well is completely irrelevant if you lose money. Like, what is so complicated to understand about this? Nintendo makes more money by selling less units than PlayStation does with their numbers. Like, the actual number of sales does not matter if you're not bringing in the profits. Like that. This is the thing that people don't seem to understand, is that they just say like, well, higher sales number, better, without really thinking like, well, first of all, the sales numbers are fake. And second of all, like the sales they are making aren't pulling in the profits that they need to drive Nintendo out of business, which has always been their business strategy. So basically, throughout the past 25 years, it's been Sony that's been failing. Like, the reality is, these guys sit there and they always say, like, well, the GameCube failed because of the lower sales numbers. The N64 failed because of the lower sales numbers. And then meanwhile, when you look at reality, at the time, Pokemania was in full swing. Like, that was the beginning of Nintendo's successful foray into, having a top-rated kids television program with the Pokemon anime, with the trading card game, with the Pokemon thing in general, which would go on to be like the most merchandisable brand on the planet, right? Like the PS1 beat the N64. Like, the PS1 couldn't even beat Pokemon, as an individual brand. That is the reality of the situation. The grim issue that people don't want to acknowledge is that they can't just like say that like, well, the N64 sold less, so that means that they were less successful than PlayStation. No, that was in the height of Pokemania. At the time, all anybody cared about was Pokemon. Final Fantasy VII was not as big as Pokemon, and that's an incontrovertible fact. People just like to say that like Pokemon was a fad or whatever. Like the kids would grow out of it. There's an entire South Park episode about that, Chin Pokemon, which was intended to push the idea that Pokemon was a fad that would soon die. But the reality is quite different. Pokemon has grown and expanded to become like this incredibly popular worldwide brand, and there's just nothing you can do to change that fact.
Not have really made their money back, or I think they might have made a little bit of money back towards the end. I think they were a little bit profitable, but guess what? The PS2 still whooped Nintendo's asses. You just need to accept that.
Just like the reality that people don't want to admit is that Nintendo actually makes money on their shit, and like PlayStation doesn't.
Well, Harmon, I was actually incorrect. The PS3, yes, it was a loss technically, but they were profitable for the PS1, the PS2, the PS4, and the PS5, the most profitable they've ever been. And guess what? So there was only one system where they were not profitable. Pretty positive that Nintendo was not profitable during the Wii U. I could be wrong, but I don't think
they were profitable during the Wii U.
That they actually were.
They don't want to talk about profits. They want to talk about things that don't actually matter, like fake sales numbers and like
Do you have any proof of that, Harmon? I understand that you continue to cope and seethe over the fact that the PS2 is still the greatest selling console of all time, but it's okay. We will build you a closet for you to go cry in if you would like.
trying to gaslight you into thinking that kids don't like play Mario anymore. It's their entire industry has always been built around this idea of like pretending as if Nintendo is like perpetually on like the verge of bankruptcy.
I have never heard Sony ever sit there and say that, but I'm pretty certain that Sony says that Nintendo and Mario are for children, so I think you might have gotten that twisted.
And the reality is like so far in the other direction that like I think people would be shocked by it. The fact that just how well run of a company Nintendo actually is. They have to be the best, the most well run entertainment company in the world right now.
Oh, congratulations, Harmon. They might be well ran, but guess what? They're ripping you guys off more than any other company is.
How is Nintendo ripping anyone off? Like, what are they doing? Putting out their highly affordable console with their highly affordable games. Like they always want to complain about like Mario Kart's price point, but they conveniently neglect the fact that like Bonanza is cheaper, Dragon Drive is cheaper. Plenty of other games are cheaper, right? Like it's Mario Kart World is kind of an anomaly in that regard because like it's such a huge like AAA thing for them. Like yeah, they're gonna raise the price point for that. So, but like other games are still more affordable. So, with that being said, like who are you trying to fool? Like who are you trying to like Nintendo is ripping you off. Well, they're still producing games. They're not firing people. They're not like doing all this like underhanded nonsense that other companies are doing. Like again, what is Nintendo doing that's so terrible? Like, oh, they're selling Mario Kart World at $80. Like Grand Theft Auto 6 is probably going to be more expensive than that and it's going to be a worse game. So like, you're going to see a lot of people like refuse to acknowledge that when it does happen. They're going to say all this stuff about how like, it's just a way more intensive game than what Nintendo produces, but like I do think like it does need to be said now that nothing Grand Theft Auto 6 will do is going to be like as sophisticated or insane as what Nintendo is doing with Mario Kart World or with Bonanza. Like we're at the point now where the random Nintendo IPs are just so much more technically demanding than Grand Theft Auto. It's not even really funny. Like people really need to get it through their heads that like just because something's in a realistic city setting and just because it has a big open map, that doesn't necessarily mean it has like deeper, more complex mechanics than like what Nintendo is doing with their other games. Like I said this about like Xenoblade Chronicles X too. Like if you want to talk about like big open RPGs, you don't really get bigger than Xenoblade Chronicles X. Like honestly, but like good luck getting the community to acknowledge that. To acknowledge that Xenoblade Chronicles X's open world is far bigger than anything in Grand Theft Auto. That flying around in a Skell is cooler than anything in Grand Theft Auto. Um, like good luck getting anyone to acknowledge that because like that flies in the face of the narrative that Nintendo could not produce a game like that. And if you do get people to acknowledge it, they'll just try and tell you the game will come to PC eventually, which is not and never was true. But anyway, this was an absolute train wreck of a video. I have no idea like what this guy like thought he was cooking with this, but this was just straight up just brain dead, insane coping and seething. Like so much so that like I uh I wanted to make this video to just emphasize just how like insane and delusional this guy actually is. But yeah, I think this is going to be the last time. I do expect going forward that I will never talk about this individual again because he just isn't worth my time. He's not worth anyone's time. This guy is a nobody. Like I think all I would have to do is just breathe on him and he would just explode into a shower of sparks.